Hey there YouTube lovers, my name is BB8 and today I am going to do my updated Sonic ranking. The reason I wanted to do my updated Sonic ranking is because of the 3 Sonic games to have released since my Sonic ranking 2 years ago, consisting of Frontiers, Superstars, and Sonic Cross Shadow Generations. And for those who don't know about my backlogged account, this will provide the answer to where my previous 3 fall on the ranking. And there were games I did forget to include in my 2022 ranking, being Sonic Advance 3, but now is my chance to include it. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? It's time to reveal it. It's time to reveal the last place of my Sonic ranking. And the worst Sonic game of all time goes to... probably not everybody's first choice, but we're gonna roll with it. Number 36. Sonic the Hedgehog Game Boy Advance. This was probably a Sonic game nobody expected to be all the way at the bottom of my Sonic ranking. But why not Sonic Boom, The Rise of Lyric, Sonic Forces, or Sonic 06? They're the most hated in the franchise. Well, I can't deny that the original Sonic game from 1991 is a classic, but unfortunately the Game Boy Advance version of Sonic 1 is just awful. The reasons why are to do with the controls being slippy and awful audio in comparison to the Sega Mega Drive. And I would say that Sonic 1 on the Game Boy Advance is the worst way to experience the original Sonic game. And I literally don't have an awful lot to say about this game, but calling it an awful port of a classic Mega Drive game. Number 35, Sonic Boom, The Rise of Lyric. Not counting ports of older Sonic games, Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric probably has to be the worst Sonic game by far. The graphics felt a lot like a game from Outright Games, the music was pretty forgettable, the gameplay is nothing like Sonic since the game is exploring based. Frontiers succeeded with the exploring gimmick, but Rise of Lyric, no. It didn't succeed at all. And at least I could say one positive thing about every Sonic game, apart from the bottom 2 on the list. Number 34, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Sonic 06, I would say, is by far one of the worst Sonic games, because of how messy it was. The game had glitches all over it, the load times were horrible, and the controls just sucked. And if I had to say one positive thing about Sonic 06, it would probably have to be Silver the Hedgehog and Blaze. But hopefully, a future game can redeem these two. Number 33, Sonic the Hedgehog 4. The problem I have with Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is the same problem I had with Kirby Star Allies, but worse. Separating the game into multiple parts made the game feel incomplete, and what doesn't help is that the level design and the gameplay sucks. Considering that Sonic the Hedgehog 4 was never completed, I wouldn't even consider it worth playing at all. Number 32, Tails Sky Patrol. I understand that this is a Game Gear game, and I'm not expecting anything long from this, but the 15-minute length is horrendous. Even Super Mario Land from the Game Boy has more time than Tails Sky Patrol. All you really did in Sky Patrol is dodge enemies and keep your ring safe. That's it. There isn't really much to say about Tails Sky Patrol, but I can say for now that character-based Sonic spin-offs have worked in the past with Shadow the Hedgehog and Knuckles Chaotix, but the first attempt at a Tails game was not successful. Number 31, Sonic Chaos. I am aware of the platform that this game released on, but this is probably one of the most flawed Sonic games. The visuals don't work because it loses colours from the Mega Drive Sonic games. The music was alright, but in comparison to the Mega Drive, I don't think any of the Master System Sonic games really work that well. Number 30, Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal. Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal wasn't as bad as Rise of Lyric, but still doesn't work for me for a variety of reasons. The backtracking is ridiculous, especially for a 2014 game, which can put people off playing it, and the game takes too much time to finish because of the backtracking, and the game persuading you to collect more crystals to get to other levels. But other than that, the boss design in it was pretty mid, and I don't know what else to say about Shattered Crystal, only because it is one of the most forgettable in the whole Sonic franchise. Now, with all the F tiers covered, we're now moving on to the D tiers, with number 29, Sonic the Hedgehog Triple Trouble. I don't even understand why they named this Triple Trouble. Like, there is only 2 playable characters, being Sonic and Tails. The title is literally false advertising, and I don't know what else I can talk about with Triple Trouble, because it is a Master System game after all, and it is another forgettable Sonic game that barely has anything good I can talk about, other than the music or the 2 character gimmick, unlike Sonic Chaos. Number 28, Sonic Boom Fire and Ice. Why did they do multiple Sonic Boom games again? I feel like they only made 3 of them to market the cartoon and nothing else, with no care put into the gameplay of one of them. And it may sound like something said out of a Shay Phyllis video, where he'd go like this: why did they do multiple Sonic Boom games? Are you kidding me? They're all pointless. I'm sorry, I do not really do a good impression of Shay Phyllis, but I actually do feel that way with the Sonic Boom games. But Fire and Ice, the gameplay was okay, but the plot kind of sucked. The cutscenes actually made it feel like you were watching the not good Sonic Boom cartoon. Number 27, Sonic 3D Blast. I kind of feel like 3D Blast suffered with false advertising, the same problem that Triple Trouble suffered with, because Sonic 3D Blast feels more like a tech demo than an actual game, and I feel like this was more like an SNES effects chip type game, similar to Star Fox or Stunt Race effects. The levels were pretty hard to navigate, and considering how poorly designed the environments are, but for a first attempt at making a 3D Sonic game, it was kind of mid. Number 26, Sonic Forces. Considering that this is considered a bottom tier Sonic game by many people, the reason it's higher for me is because Sonic Forces actually does have aspects I actually like. The game does look good visually, better than Sonic Boom. You can customize your own character, which you can't do in other Sonic games, and I would probably go on to say that the character customizer is my favourite part of Forces. The gameplay sucked, the story was alright, and the dialogue was a bit awful. I do have positives to say about Forces, but for me, it's a mid-tier Sonic game at the end of the day. And it's the only Sonic game on Switch I don't own for a reason. Number 25, Minecraft Sonic the Hedgehog. Even though this is not considered as a full game, I did bring it up on my Sonic ranking I did years ago, so I thought I would keep it in. As a Minecraft expansion, it works, but as a full Sonic game, it just doesn't. The reason why the Sonic Minecraft expansion is flawed is because the level design is repetitive and the controls don't really translate that well. Not to mention that this expansion runs terribly on Nintendo Switch. Since the Switch is the platform I regularly use for Sonic, it just didn't run that well. And on the bright side, the Sonic skins you got with the Minecraft expansion can be used anywhere in Minecraft, not just the Sonic expansion. Number 24, Sonic Lost World. If I'm being brutally honest about Lost World, I wanted to like this game before actually playing it, because I do remember seeing this game on the Nintendo eShop when it first came out in 2013. Like, I was heavily interested to play this as a kid, but finally getting to play the game as an adult, I just found it really difficult to get into. I didn't like the gameplay, the story wasn't interesting, the characters being the Deadly Six were alright, which Zavok is probably the best part of Lost World. And I kind of take back what I said about the level design being curved 2 years ago, but the curved level design does add a unique aspect to Lost World, but I feel like it was stolen from Super Mario Galaxy. And one thing I would like to mention about Lost World is that the 3DS version probably has the worst special stages in the whole Sonic franchise. Now moving on from the more mediocre Sonic games with the D tiers, and now we're moving on to the more alright Sonic games with the C tiers, with number 23, Sonic and the Secret Rings. I'm gonna be attacked by a few Sonic fans for this, but Sonic and the Secret Rings wasn't actually a bad game. I know, but hear me out. I found the storybook Sonic games to be underrated, because I enjoyed the mythology aspect of it. The story in the Secret Rings was actually alright. The villain was decent, but the one area that hasn't aged that well is the controls. And if Sonic in the Secret Rings, as well as Sonic and the Black Knight, get remasters in the future, hopefully they can fix the controls, since it felt more like a showcase for what the Wii can do than an actual Sonic game. Number 22, Sonic Advance 3. I forgot to include this on my Sonic ranking that I did 2 years ago, but Sonic Advance 3 for me is nothing to write home to. It's not necessarily bad, but not one of my favourites. That's the best way I can describe it. I don't feel like the level design is that memorable between all three in the Sonic Advance trilogy, and the best part of the trilogy in general is probably Cream the Rabbit and Cheese. Number 21, Tails Adventure. The reason that Tails Adventure is higher than Sky Patrol for me is because the gameplay is more fleshed out, and there is more to talk about with Tails Adventure than Sky Patrol. First of all, it's a Metroidvania game on the Game Gear. I've had a good experience with the Metroid series so far, with the exception of Other M and Federation Force, and while it's not top tier like the Ori games or the Metroid franchise, I would say that Tails Adventure is the closest thing we would get to a Sonic Metroidvania. Number 20, Sonic Advance 2. The big problem with the Advance trilogy at all is there's nothing to talk about. Yeah, it looks great visually for a Game Boy Advance game. I just think the level design lacked creativity, which made other Sonic games more enjoyable to play. Even though I do understand the Game Boy Advance has hardware limitations, which held the Sonic Advance trilogy back. Number 19, Sonic CD. In my opinion, Sonic CD is probably the weakest of the Genesis Mega Drive era, but hear me out. I think the time travel gimmick in the game is really good. Metal Sonic is cool, but the reason why I would consider this the lowest out of the Mega Drive era is because the level design isn't particularly memorable, neither is the music, and I feel like Sonic CD is more designed as a tech demo to show off what the Mega Drive CD expansion can do, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing to talk about with Sonic CD other than what I've just described. Number 18, Sonic Advance. While the Game Boy Advance era has been a bit rough for Sonic with the awful port of Sonic 1 and an okayish trilogy of Sonic games, I feel like Sonic Advance 1 is the best out of the three. I didn't think the gameplay was badly integrated onto the Game Boy Advance, but the story was okay-ish. Not bad, just okay. Number 17, Sonic and the Black Knight. While I feel like the soundtrack didn't properly align with the game's medieval theme, Sonic and the Black Knight was a pretty underrated one. The sword gimmick was cool, even though the mandatory motion controls kind of suck, especially if you go through the game on an emulator, and the only things I didn't like about it and the secret rings is that they felt more like tech demos for the Wii respectively, but they were okay games. I would say there are multiple Sonic games that are in urgent need of a remake to fix major issues that they had, and the storybook Sonic games are a prime example of that. That's all the alright Sonic games covered. Now we're moving on to the more good or decent Sonic games with number 16, Sonic Unleashed. Unleashed, to be fair, was underrated. The reason why is because I do enjoy the werehog mechanic, which does make the game more interesting to play. The story and the soundtrack are solid, even though Lost World might be next in line for a remaster. I think it should go to Unleashed instead, because that was the better Sonic game. Number 15, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. This one is a bit of a weird one, considering that Sega won't re-release this game in a Sega Ages style on the eShop. Given that they can't legally use a version of the game that Michael Jackson composed the music for, and the game typically isn't a bad one, since we were introduced to Knuckles for the first time, with it being one of the first ever games to have a DLC expansion with the Sonic 3 and Knuckles expansion. Number 14, Sonic Adventure. Kickstarting the golden era of 3D Sonic, Sonic Adventure was another underrated Sonic game, and this is one I would probably consider better than any game to come out between Sonic 06 and Sonic Colors. And while I do think the sequel was better than the original, I feel like the original Sonic Adventure game doesn't get enough attention in comparison to Adventure 2. The level design and the soundtrack were both great in it though. Number 13, Sonic Superstars. Sonic Superstars was a decent game, not as good as Mania, but definitely what Sonic the Hedgehog 4 should have been. The level design is fun. Cyberstation Zone is probably my favourite zone in the whole game, but the only things I can say I didn't like about Superstars is the underutilization of the Chaos Emerald abilities, and the multiplayer just got boring very quickly. Number 12, Sonic Colors Ultimate. Alright, now that I have confirmed that I'm including re-releases in this ranking, let's talk about Sonic Colors Ultimate. I bet a few of you are going to say that the performance sucks, but if you take away from the technical side of things for 1 second, I don't mind the Ultimate re-release of Sonic Colors, but there were a few elements I didn't like, such as the Jade Wisp being underutilized, and the music not including an option to play the Wii original. But ignoring the performance, these are the only flaws I can come up with. Number 11, Knuckles Chaotix. a pretty underrated Sonic spin-off on the Sega 32X, where I didn't think at first that these Sonic games actually made their debut here, because I do think they are underrated characters in their own right, that being the trio Chaotix, consisting of Vector the Crocodile, Espio the Chameleon, and Charmy the Bee. And while the ring gameplay in Chaotix was weird, it was a fun time, because I loved the movesets that each character provided, and I feel like this is one that does deserve its comeback, not only as a re-release on Sega Mega Drive, Nintendo Switch Online, but with a new game in the Mania engine, because I am interested in seeing more of the Chaotix. And now with all the B tiers covered, now it's time to get into the A tiers with number 10, Sonic Adventure 2. I can't deny that Sonic Adventure 2 is an improvement over the original Sonic game in its own way. Sonic Adventure 2 has an iconic soundtrack with tracks such as Live and Learn, and the level design is pretty memorable as well, such as City Escape, and not to forget that my favourite character in the whole Sonic franchise made his debut in this game, being Shadow. And speaking of Shadow, number 9, Shadow the Hedgehog. This game was so ahead of its time. I think Shadow the Hedgehog was a more unique Sonic game because of the number of story paths that are in the game. The soundtrack is great, considering that it gives me the vibes of mid to late 2000s arcade music. And although Sonic Cross Shadow Generations did do more with Shadow in terms of lore, Shadow the Hedgehog is probably the most underrated Sonic spin-off, to be fair. And a lot of 3D Sonic games are underrated, and this is probably the second most underrated behind one other, which will come up after number 8, which is number 8, Sonic the Hedgehog 1991. There is no denying that the original Sonic game on the Mega Drive is iconic, even if the Game Boy Advance port is the worst way to play it. The soundtrack and the levels are some of the most memorable in the whole franchise, and with how many times I've played Sonic 1, if you haven't played it already, I definitely recommend checking it out, just not on the Game Boy Advance. Number 7, Sonic Heroes. Yet again, I wish that people would appreciate the GameCube era of Sonic a bit more, only because of how unique Sonic Heroes was. I was actually born 1 week after this game released, but back on track. I like how this game has 4 story paths, 1 for each team, and I think a remake could add more paths onto it, which should make Sonic Heroes an experience that stands out more and probably the most underrated from the adventure era. Number 6, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I would pick Sonic 2 over Sonic 1 any day, because with the inclusion of Tails, it makes navigating levels more exciting, and I would go on to say that Sonic 2 actually has my favourite soundtrack from the Mega Drive era, with the most memorable zones being Emerald Hill, Chemical Plant, and Casino Night. And I definitely think that Sonic 2 has a better final boss, which was improved in Generations, but we will get to Generations in a bit. Number 5, Sonic Frontiers. Sonic is no stranger to experimenting with something new to make an installment stand out. Frontiers did stand out to me because of the open zone gimmick that the game provided. The only flaw I can confirm I had with Frontiers is that the open zones just felt a bit empty to me. But other than that, the soundtrack was banging, especially with tracks such as Undefeatable. And that's the last of the A tiers, meaning that only 4 games remain on my ranking, with the S tiers consisting of number 4, Sonic Mania. Sonic Mania is extremely fun with a lot of replay value. I've literally played through the story 6 times, 1 as each character, considering how replayable Sonic Mania is. And Sonic Mania probably has the most memorable levels in a Sonic game, especially since Sonic Mania has the best special levels in the whole franchise. Mighty and Ray were pretty fun to play as, in addition to Sonic, Tails and Knuckles, and even if the zones were reused from past Sonic games, it's still by far the best pure 2D Sonic game. Number 3, Sonic Generations. The 2010s hasn't really been a kind decade to Sonic, but this was one of the exceptions, like Mania and Sonic Colors. Sonic Generations does reuse zones from past Sonic games, but the only difference with Mania is that it expands from the Mega Drive era up to Colors. And I really love how each level in Generations felt faithful to their original counterparts, even if less favoured Sonic games like Sonic 06 were used in the game. And I still think that Generations has great level design and creative use of different zones, especially Casino Night Zone being used as a pinball game. Number 2, Sonic Colors. Not counting the remasters of all the Sonic games, Sonic Colors in its original release has to be my favourite Sonic game, not including remasters. The concept of Sonic Colors probably has to be my favourite concept in a Sonic game, even without Shadow involved. The Wisps were really fun to play around with in the levels, with Colors having some of the best world building in a Sonic game thanks to the Wisps. And I really loved the soundtrack as well. The Wii era was one of Sonic's take it or leave it eras, with games like The Secret Rings and The Black Knight, but Sonic Colors probably has to be my favourite from the Wii era of Sonic. And finally, we have made it to number 1, Sonic Cross Shadow Generations. The only Sonic game to make it into the certified gold club so far. Sonic Cross Shadow Generations was a remaster that was well worth the wait. A remaster of Generations was unnecessary, but exploring Shadow's past was the perfect excuse to re-release Sonic Generations with an extra Shadow Generations arc. I love the Dragon Ball Z level of character building they gave to Shadow, especially with how much his past has been explored, showcasing abilities we haven't seen Shadow use before, and this definitely proves that Shadow is the best Sonic character, who does deserve a second chance at his own spin-off game. So guys, what did you think of my updated ranking of the Sonic games? And I can safely say for now, considering how long this video is, this may actually be my last video before going on my Christmas break. Unfortunately, I won't be back to making new videos until January the 20th, but my review of Sonic Movie 3 will be recorded in advance. So, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and turn your notification bell on so you don't miss another video like this one in the future. And I will see you all in a future video. BB8 out.